The Corona crisis, how bad will it be? How long will it take? 4 scenarios for your business strategy. Hello. This is an instruction for your strategy as a leader and entrepreneur during the crisis. We are all intensively busy these days with maintaining health, solvency, and operational readiness. But as leaders, we also have one central task: to give the team and ourselves a credible perspective for the time after the crisis. I want to provide you with a process how to do this with your team. Today, we take the first step. You will also find additional links to useful sources. We're going to produce more videos, so therefore subscribe to this channel and also ring the bell. One might think that now is not the time to think about the future. Understandable, but dangerous and therefore wrong. Now more than ever, all of us and your team need a visible and justified hope for a good time after the crisis, so that we can now be prudent, capable of shaping the future, and strong in implementation. So that in the here and now, we can do the right things for a good future. Reserve one day a week now to work on the future of your company and your team. Now, leadership is really needed. Fair weather leadership is easy. Good leaders will now seize the opportunity to rethink their work and their business despite and because of this crisis. And even if it's difficult to imagine at the moment, there will be a good time after this crisis again. In the big picture, our world of the future will always be much better than most people think. The quality of life will continue to improve. So, it's important to invest time, spirit, and also money in the future now. Let's start with a question. Where could this crisis lead to? This is my pair of blue futures glasses, the first of 5. Please find below the links to 2 videos about this model, which we call the Eltville model. I will present 4 scenarios that we developed with a very simple methodology. The scenarios are only a sketch for your business, so please think the scenarios further, broader, and deeper. My scenarios are just raw material for you. What really counts are your assumptions about the future. They are deeply based on emotions, mostly not rational, and pretty muddied through cognitive biases. I can tell I've been experiencing this for almost 30 years. You cannot buy your assumptions, nor can I give them to you as a gift. You have to go through the thinking process with your team yourself. And please, scenarios are not predictions. Again, scenarios do not foretell the future. The assumption scenarios only describe the corners of the sphere of possibilities. Please tell this to your team very clearly. Otherwise, you will achieve the opposite of hope. And at the end of this video, I will tell you what I and we at Future Management Group assume to be likely. Some of the scenarios that I'm going to present in a minute are pretty hard. May one really develop and spread such scenarios? Absolutely, we even have to. They do not necessarily belong in the yellow press or in cable news shows, but they belong in every meeting room. This is the only way to sufficiently expand your view for a future robust strategy. It is essential that you look rationally at what might happen and form your future assumptions accordingly, together with your team. Without any wishful thinking, without subjective preferences, without biases, at least as little as possible. Because only if everyone is aware of what could lie ahead and you have a common assessment, then will you have the necessary basis for your future strategy. Then your strategy will be understood rationally, supported emotionally, and implemented effectively. Here are the scenarios. They provide answers to the 2 most critical questions right now with a perspective on early 2021. How bad could it get? Crash, recession, crash, depression. How long will it last? Short term, long term. When you combine the 4 extremes, you get 4 pictures of a possible situation in early 2021. So, short term and crash recession is quick recovery. Long term and crash recession is long crisis. Short term and crash depression is mega crash. Long-term and crash depression is system change. The 4 scenarios are described along 7 fields: virus, medicine, society, states, companies, the world economy, and the stock markets. You will find a link below to a PDF presentation of the scenarios. Scenario 2021, quick recovery. Virus. The drastic measures have taken effect and have greatly reduced the speed at which the virus spreads worldwide in May 2020. There is widespread controversy whether the measures were appropriate, too hard or too weak. Medicine. Massive worldwide research led to effective drugs in early summer and a first vaccine in fall. For a long time, the intensive care capacities of the clinics were severely overstretched, but were greatly expanded with innovative measures. Rapid innovations in diagnostics made it gradually possible to detect infections almost immediately, so that only individual patients needed to be isolated in order to protect everyone and prevent such crises for the future. Society. From May onwards, public and private life returned to normal very quickly. The shock of the crisis brought people nationally, internationally, and globally to more trust and cooperation. People knew their neighbors again and helped each other. Through social distancing, the opportunities offered by digitalization and other technologies were seized to a great extent within a few weeks, which had not been possible in years before. Optimism is growing fast. States. Massive interventions by governments and central banks kept insolvencies and unemployment lower than feared. The prevented insolvencies also stabilized the banking system. Global cooperation grew. Those who came out of the crisis better helped the badly hit. The social security systems are being rethought and rebuilt on a global scale. Companies. Most companies recovered from the summer onwards and gradually returned to the monthly sales level of fall 2019. More than 5% of the companies are in insolvency. They're bankrupt compared to a normal value of 1 to 2%. World economy. Global economic output slumped by about 6%, as in 2009. And economic output in Asia has recovered. In Europe and the USA, the slump averaged 10%. The recovery began immediately after the lockdowns ended. In the stock markets, the MSCI World Index has recovered to the level of the end of 2019. Scenario 2021, long crisis. Virus. In many places, the measures came too late and were too weak. Despite high temperatures, the number of infections, seriously ill people, and deaths still rose exponentially. It was not until fall that the spread of the virus was contained, when 2/3 of the world population had been infected and herd immunity was effective. The virus remains a threat and often leads to regional lockdowns. Medicine. Medications were already available in early summer, but the supply was far from sufficient to care for all the sick. A vaccine was only available at the beginning of 2021, but its usability was still disputed, and it was still not available to all those who wanted to be vaccinated. Society. The restrictions on public life lasted well into the fall and were then gradually and almost completely eliminated. New outbreaks are occurring in some places, triggered by overly optimistic and careless infected people. Nationalist and populist tendencies are at a peak, but major upheavals have failed to materialize. The mood is predominantly critical. Only gradually is optimism spreading. States. The banks, which had long been in trouble, had to be rescued and stabilized with nationalization and guarantees. This prevented an economic and currency crash. Global cooperation is holding up, but is being put to the test. Companies. State intervention up to the nationalization of system-critical companies was not sufficient and came too late. 15% of the companies are bankrupt. Above all, the zombie companies, which had survived only through low interest rates, did not make it. The number of unemployed people has doubled in months, over 15% on average in Europe. World economy. The global economic output plummeted by over 10%. In Europe and the USA by more than 15%, in Asia by around 5%. After the first signs of hope, the recovery is only starting very slowly. On stock exchange, after severe turbulence, the MSCI World Index is around 30% lower than at the end of 2019. Scenario 2021, the mega crash, virus. The containment was largely successful by fall, but in fall there was a new outbreak of the multiply mutated virus. The level of immunity achieved remained largely without effect. Medicine. Effective drugs to treat the sick are widely available, but still not for everyone. The intensive care capacities were not able to treat and save the number of seriously ill patients even after temporary takeovers of hotels and rehabilitation clinics. Testing did by far not cover the necessary share of people. There is still no applicable vaccine. Society. A strong regulation of public life enforced by state power is still in force. Trust between people and countries is at a low. Xenophobia, aggression against authorities, conflicts and violence have increased significantly. Cooperation between countries and regions is severely restricted by isolationist policies of populist decision makers. The supply chains did not hold up, as governments have repeatedly claimed and promised. States. Many distressed banks were not rescued. States lacked the willingness and also the means. Deficit protection for customer deposits is guaranteed, but ECB measures were tantamount to currency reform. Many savers have lost large part of their financial assets. The European Union is fighting for its existence. Several countries have announced their exit. Companies. People are currently only buying what they really need to live. Most companies only generate 50% of their 2019 sales. Even the massive interventions by the governments and the central banks have not prevented the insolvency, the bankruptcy of 30% of companies, and the explosion of unemployment to over 30% on average in the European Union. In Spain, 50%, in Germany, 20%. World economy. The world economic output collapsed by 25% from $87 to $66 trillion to the level of 2010. The recovery has been surprisingly fast because of the huge investments made by companies and governments. Stock exchange. At its low, the MSCI World Index had plummeted from 2,400 in February to 800, down by a previously unimaginable 67%. Scenario 2021, system change. With virus, medicine, companies, world economy, and stock exchange, everything was like in the scenario mega crash. But this scenario continued with a system change. Society. More and more people were no longer able to bear the restrictions of life to an extent unknown for a century. An additional catastrophic event, which would otherwise only have caused concern, intensifies the fears and aggressions. All over the world, the most diverse social groups are rising up in massive violent protests, in some places with conditions similar to civil war. More than ever, truth is not a question of facts, but of the will to accept facts and of deception. Many governments were voted out, many of them even overthrown by force. States. Here we have three sub-scenarios. Sub-scenario A, Trumpism as a model. The new right-wing populist governments in large parts of the globe radically break up established structures, massively abolish ecological and social regulations, and pursue nationalist and anti-globalist programs. The world is an arena of national governments fighting each other. Sub-scenario B, China as a role model. The state conquered by the left-wing populist governments is seen as the only guarantee of justice and takes over a large part of the economy through expropriations in dozens of countries. At the same time, foreign policy and foreign trade strategies are aggressively nationalistic. The world is again divided into blocks. Sub-scenario C, the third way. The mega crash has made us all aware that overarching cooperation is the only sustainable way. Governments of the political center are formed and scientists of all disciplines are consulted with in order to rethink society, politics and economy. Despite the contradictions, unprecedented pressure from the population has enabled the synthesis of guaranteed social prosperity, environmental protection, technologization, and free enterprise with strict social and ecological standards. What do I and what do we at Future Management Group believe is likely? In principle, the scenarios are all equally likely. We at Future Management Group prepare for the mega crash because it is the safest strategy. I personally believe that something between quick recovery and the long crisis is likely to evolve. How should you use the scenarios? Again, the scenarios are just raw material. Please form your own assumptions about the future with your team. Think the scenarios further, wider, and deeper. Think through the scenarios and then analyze your business along them. The questions for your analysis are: 1. If we had to bet a lot of money on it, and you're actually doing so now, what developments do we expect ourselves? What are our assumptions about the future? 2. If it comes to that, what are the consequences for our business, our people, our business model, our strategy, and our finances? 3. What can we do effectively now to protect and prepare ourselves for these scenarios? 4. What opportunities can we identify and recognize that we can now seize and implement? 5. If we seize the opportunities, what positive picture of the future can we draw for the time after the crisis? And 6. How do we make sure that as many people as possible in the team understand this vision of the future rationally, support it emotionally, and implement it powerfully? See you in the next part. Subscribe to this channel and ring the bell. Now more than ever. Have a bright future.